In a world of wavetables and FM synthesis, things can get pretty complex, and sometimes you just want something simple that sounds great out of the box. Enter the Kepler, FL Studio's brand new emulation of the classic Roland Juno 6 synthesizer. And not only does this synth sound amazing, but it's totally free. So in this video, I'm gonna dive into everything you need to know about the Kepler and why you should make it your next go-to analog synth. And while you're at it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button to help the channel out. And with that out of the way now, let's get into it. This is what the Kepler looks like. As mentioned, it's a recreation of the Juno 6 synthesizer by Roland, which was an iconic synthesizer introduced in the early 80s. One of the main innovations of the Juno 6 was the digitally controlled oscillators. Before the Juno 6, oscillators were often voltage controlled, and so this meant when the Juno 6 was introduced that the synthesizer would not go out of tune, because this would happen very frequently with voltage controlled oscillators. But here with a digitally controlled oscillator, you were always sure it would stay in tune. This is quite a foreign concept for us because now everything is digital, everything is in the box, nothing goes out of tune. But in the past, analog synthesizers would go out of tune based on the humidity of the room, the heat, etc. And so the Juno 6 was a big innovation in that sense. You could just set it up on stage and you'd be sure it would be in tune. Let me give you a bit of a demo as to what this synth can sound like. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the different sounds you can create with the Kepler. So it goes all the way from strings to bass to leads. But for now, let's dive into how this synth actually works. So in the tradition of analog synths, it's not the most visual synth. So if you're used to using Serum or Vital, you won't have all the visual aids that you're used to, the wavetables, etc. But in a sense, I find this quite useful actually, because with these types of analog model synths, you're really trusting your ears and not relying on anything really visual. You're just moving sliders around and trusting your ears to find something that you like. So let's break down how the Kepler works. First section here is the Arpeggiator. I'll come back to that later. Then you have an LFO section here. Here you have the DCO, which is the digitally controlled oscillators, or just oscillators. You have three main oscillators. You have a pulse width oscillator right here. I can just turn it on and off like this. You have a saw wave oscillator right here that you can turn on and off. And then you have a sub oscillator, which is a square wave, so not a sine wave like you might be used to in Serum. This is a square wave, which will play one octave lower than the other oscillators. And the volume of that sub oscillator is controlled right here. And then you have a fourth oscillator, which is a noise oscillator, which is this slider right here. So technically 4 oscillators, but 3 main ones. And this is what's great with these traditional analog synths. You just have 2 or 3 different oscillators, but you can still create a huge range of sounds. Next up here, you have 2 different types of filters. The first one is a simple high-pass filter. I think it goes up to around 200 hertz, 170 actually. So this won't allow you to sculpt your entire sound. It's really more just to remove any sub or rumble for your sound up to 170 hertz. Then you have the main filter here, the voltage controlled filter, but let's just call it a filter. And this one is a low pass filter. Next, you have your VCA, which is just the amp. So basically just the output of the synth. You can set it to envelope or gate, which we'll explain later on. You then have your ADSR envelope, so controlling the attack, decay, sustain, and release of your sound. And finally, you have 2 simple effects here, 2 different types of chorus. And the funny thing here is that I believe on the original Juno 6, you could only enable one or the other of the choruses. But here with the Kepler, they've actually allowed you to use both choruses in combination. By the way, if sound design is new to you, check out our Producer Launchpad program. It's our brand new one-on-one coaching program where you learn everything from sound design to mixing to mastering. There's a link in the description if you want to check it out. So let's start at the beginning. I'm going to reset the Kepler to its initial setting. So here we're starting out with a sawtooth wave, and the only thing you can do here is just turn it on and off. So super simple. Now if we move to the left here, we have a pulse wave. Now for the pulse wave, you actually have a few different options here, which we'll explore in a minute. You could play with just a sub if you want. And finally, we have a noise oscillator here. So let me turn on the arpeggiator here and play a chord. And so you can increase the rate right here. I'm on 16 notes. You can also turn the rate off. So this will set the arpeggiator in hertz. And so then you can adjust it manually. You have three simple modes here. So the first one, which we were using, is up. You can do up and down, or simply down. So the most common way of using arpeggiators is for melodies and arps, but I actually like to use them for rolling bass lines. So let me quickly show you. I have this sound loaded up here. I'm going to boost the sub a bit and add a tiny bit of noise. Perfect. Now let me turn on the arpeggiator, sync it with our project first and set it to 16th notes. Next up in the menu, I'm just going to select quantize first arpeggiator step. And so this will make sure that the first note of our arpeggiator is always on the grid. Now I have this beat going on here. Let me play it and just play the bass line over it. But if you're going for the true synthwave effect, you need to turn on a bit of side chaining. So that's for the arpeggiator here. Let's turn it off for now. And let's look at the LFO section. LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and it's basically a way to modulate other parameters within your synth. So here with rate turned off, we're controlling the LFO rate in hertz. If I turn on rate, this will simply sync the LFO with our project. And over here in the oscillators, you see this LFO, and this will be the amount of modulation of the frequency. So you could set a low amount of modulation just to give a tiny bit of detuning to your sound. So this will just give a tiny bit of wobble to your sound, or you could go way up for more extreme effects. I'm not sure when you would use that kind of sound, but it's good to know that you can do it. So this was the LFO controlling the frequency of our oscillator, but the LFO can also control our filter. And this is why we also have an LFO slider all the way in the filter section. And so you can hear how the LFO is controlling the cutoff frequency of our filter. Again, you could automate the rate here to create some really cool effects. Let's come back to our oscillators now. So I've talked about these oscillators over here, but let's focus a bit on the pulse wave oscillator. But here we have pulse width modulation, and this allows you to modulate the width of our pulse wave. So you can see we're modulating the width of our pulse wave. So you could automate this slider manually or with an automation clip if you wanted, but you can also set it to LFO. So I mentioned that the LFO controls the frequency of our oscillator and or the cutoff frequency of our filter over here, but it can also control the width of our pulse wave if we set it to LFO here. And so you can introduce some subtle variation in your sound by setting just a bit of pulse width modulation here and playing with the rate. Yeah, if you haven't guessed yet, I'm really a sucker for these types of 80s sound. For me, they're so rich and organic, even though here everything is happening digitally. I really have the feeling of playing with an analog synth. Next up, we have the high pass filter section, which is really simple. As mentioned, this simply removes some low frequencies. Next up is our main filter, which is a low pass filter. This is one of the key principles of subtractive synthesis, if you've ever heard that term. Subtractive synthesis refers to creating a signal that's very rich in harmonics, and then shaping it with a filter. I feel like there's a tiny bit of drive happening as well. I'd need to check how this filter has been modeled. I feel like there's a tiny bit of saturation being introduced as well, which is really pleasant. Right here we have our resonance. So this will boost frequencies around the cutoff frequency. Next up, we have three options here that control how the filter is applying to our sound. One of them we've already seen is the LFO. So here the frequency cutoff is being moved or modulated by our LFO. Let me turn it all the way off. We have keyboard here. So this is a keyboard tracker. So if I turn it all the way down, let me actually show you with a span over here. So if I play a low note here, we can see the filter being applied here. And this filter will stay static even if I play higher notes. So we can the filter is still being applied here. Higher notes, it doesn't move. However, if we turn keyboard on, our filter will actually adapt to the notes we're playing. So if I go back to a low note over here, we can see the filter being applied here and cutting off around 2k hertz. However, if I play a higher note, we can see it's the same shape, but we're moving up. So we're still applying a low pass filter, but allowing more frequencies to pass through. And then the filter can also be controlled by the envelope here. So let me just switch this to gate. I'll explain in a second what this means. So if I turn up the attack, the filter will actually follow that shape. So we're gonna rise up to that frequency cutoff here. And you can see that on span right here. And I can make it a bit faster if I want. Same here, I could increase the release, for example. And so here you can see as the sound is released, the filter is coming back all the way down. And so you can really shape how the filter acts with this envelope. And finally, we have our amp here, which controls the output of our sound. By default, it's set to envelope. And so this means the envelope here shapes the volume of our sound. However, you can also switch it to gate, and gate will bypass the envelope. So the ADSR settings here won't change the volume of our sound. And this allows you to actually shape the envelope as you want, but for specific parameters. So if you want a filter that opens up really slowly, so something like this, for example. So this allows you to use the envelope to shape how the filter is going to be modulated without affecting the actual envelope of your sound. So that's everything I wanted to show you about Kepler. Honestly, it's a great little synth if you want to either learn about sound design or if you want to get that really rich, warm analog sound. It's free with the latest update of FL Studio. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.